Welcome, everyone. It's great to have you all join us today. This is an experiment in the Faculty of Science. We love experiments, and we live for experiments. And this is actually a continuation of something that's really become quite famous at McGill, and that's called Soup and Science, where 4 or 5 researchers, professors, come together and give what we call a lightning talk, a 3 or 4 minute summary of some of their most exciting research. And followed by questions. In the normal course of the year, of course, it's followed by soup. But today and throughout this summer, you'll have to substitute the soup with sun. Today we have four professors who are going to present their research programs. Believe me, one of the most challenging things for a professor who could speak for hours about their research is to ask them to do it in 3 minutes. We'll see if they're up to that challenge. In the past, they always have been. So without further ado, I think I'll then introduce our first speaker. It's Professor Thomas Brunner from the Department of Physics. Thomas.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Bruce. I'm excited to be here again. Today, I'll be talking about understanding the universe through neutrinos. And actually, I picked the background picture for the Soup and Science talk that I was giving in January this year. And I didn't know that the background picture would actually be so fitting for today's event. Actually, I'm showing the sun here because the sun is the strongest neutrino source around us. So neutrinos are small fundamental particles. And actually, if you all look at your fingernail, so pretty much here, this is roughly the area of 1 square centimeter. And per second, you got about 50 billion neutrinos passing through this area. It actually doesn't matter if it's day or night because neutrinos pass through your body. They also pass through the Earth. So pretty much every second, you get these 50 billion neutrinos passing through or the area of your fingernail. However, we actually know very little about these neutrinos. We know that they exist, we have detected them, we know that they have a mass, but we actually don't even know what's the mass of these neutrinos. And so one thing that's very special about neutrinos is that they are electrically neutral, so different from, for example, an electron. The neutrino is a electrically neutral particle. And this now opens the possibility that in this description of neutrino in quantum mechanics, that neutrino and antineutrino can actually be the same particle. So kind of some distinction that typically exists between particle and antiparticle may actually not exist for neutrinos. Can we slide, please? And so, yeah, one of the things that we are trying to understand thank you. Is actually figure out if the neutrino and the antineutrino are actually the same particle. And so we are doing this by searching for a radioactive decay, which is called the neutrinoless double beta decay. And this decay can only happen if neutrino and antineutrino are the same particle. So far, no one has observed this decay yet. It's actually not foreseen in our standard model of particle physics. It actually violates this model. However, there are some indications that this decay may exist. That's why there's a worldwide search ongoing. And at the moment, the current limits on this half-life are on the order of 10 to the 26 years. And the really cool thing is that if this decay is observed, it actually could explain why we live in a matter-dominated universe. So if you look around you, you just see matter everywhere, but we don't see antimatter. So in our experiment, what we are looking for, or what we are measuring, is pretty much the electrons that are being emitted in radioactive decays. And so there are only very special cases where we even expect to see a neutrinoless double beta decay. And so this is only in cases where we have a 2-neutrino double beta decay. So what we are measuring is we just build a detector, measure energies of electrons being emitted in this radioactive decay, and then we pretty much just plot them here, so it's intensity on the vertical axis, and we have the energy of the the sum energy of both electrons on the on the horizontal axis. And so this gives you this broad bump because we don't measure the neutrinos who exist in this 2-neutrino double beta decay, so we can't measure their energy. So that's why we get this continuous distribution. If we now have a neutrinoless double beta decay, all the energy has to go into the 2 electrons. And so if we measure their sum energy, we would expect this peak here at the Q value. So that's the maximum energy that can be released in this typical decay. You ask, why hasn't anyone observed this? There's a clear peak. So this peak is actually just for demonstration. So it's normalized to 1 neutrinoless double beta decay in 100 decays. We know that this is not the case. It'll more be like the top right part, where you pretty much have this 1 in a million decays. It's actually neutrinoless double beta decay, and you have this very small peak that's sitting on the dashed line, which is the 2 neutrino double beta decay spectrum. Can we go to the next slide, please? So in order to detect these neutrinos, we need to build very large detectors. So our goal to actually reach this, the next sensitivity, or pretty much the next step in this research, is to build a detector that will be sensitive to half-lives on the order of 10 to the 20 years. So this is 10 to the 18 times the age of the universe. So these are just crazy large numbers. So we built this big detector. We plan to use 5 tons of liquid xenon that we need to cool to minus 105 degrees Celsius to keep it liquid. We put this detector in a low background environment, so in a mine actually 2 kilometers below the surface. So we plan to go to snow lab. We need to do this to actually shield against cosmic radiation. So for example, on the surface here, we just get bombarded by cosmic muons. So the radiation is way too high to perform these ultra low background experiments. And then we need to just operate this detector and wait for 10 years, something like this, see if we see an event. And at the bottom, I just have a couple of radioactivities or decay rates to give you an idea of how hard this is. So if you take a banana that you eat for breakfast, you have about 10 radioactive decays per second in this banana. Even 1 liter of outdoor air has about 1 decay per minute. And so what we are expecting to observe will have or will produce less than about 30 decays per year in 1 ton of target material. So these are just crazy numbers when you try to see these small, tiny events in this detector in which everything around you is way more radioactive. Could you go to the next slide, please? Actually, you need to tap twice. Yeah. Actually, so what really fascinates me about neutrinos is, for one, the question that there may be this totally new type of fundamental particle. But the other benefits are that I can dress up outside of Halloween. So, for example, when we go to our clean rooms, because everything has to be ultra clean and ultra pure, we get to hang out in mines. At the bottom right, you see me on shift with another colleague from Drexel. So it's actually exciting to work in this international environment. On the bottom left, you see where we were meeting actually 2 Nobel laureates, so Kajita-san and Art McDonald, who won the Nobel Prize for the discovery that neutrinos actually have mass. Yeah, we have a beautiful lab here at McGill, but I think the most rewarding thing for me is actually to work with the students in my group. So it's on the top left. And so we pretty much have students from at all levels. We have first-year undergrads up to postdocs who are 10, 15 years into their research career. And so yeah, that's really what I find fascinating. And thank you for your attention.
And next we have Professor Anna Hargreaves.
Thanks, Preeti. And thanks everyone for coming. So the map that you see here, the rainbow coloring shows the global distribution of biodiversity. And the warm colors indicate where the most species are found on the planet. And so this map only shows the diversity of vertebrates, but we see really similar patterns across all sorts of taxa, so mammals, amphibians, frogs, invertebrates, insects, plants. And what generates this global pattern of high diversity in the tropics is actually the sum of thousands of individual species distributions. And so my lab thinks a lot about species distributions, why species occur where they do, not only because they combine to shape the global patterns of biodiversity that you can see in this map, but also because they are really fundamental to many pressing conservation issues. So for example, invasive species are species that are undergoing explosive range expansions. Endangered species are often undergoing range contractions, so shrinkage of their geographic range. And of course, thousands of species are predicted to shift their range to track their preferred climate as climate change moves forward and accelerates. But so there's a lot of interest in understanding species distributions, but for the most part, when we as biologists try and model them, so we try and understand why species occur where they do now and where they'll go in the future, we often treat species as though they exist in isolation and occur all by themselves on this empty landscape. Next slide, please. And so, of course, we know this is not true. Every species exists in a web of interactions with the species around it, and these interactions can be both positive. So the interaction shown in this picture, for example, is good news for that snake, or the interactions can be negative. So the same interaction in this picture is obviously bad news for this hummingbird. And interactions between species are really the glue that binds an ecosystem together and turns a group of species into a functioning ecosystem. And they matter obviously for the fitness of individuals, but they can also shape populations and communities. Next slide, please. So my lab studies the ecology and evolution of species interactions. You can see some examples in the top left. And the ecology and evolution of species distributions, both where they occur now and where they might occur in the future. And we're especially excited when these two things merge together and we look at how they each affect each other. Next slide, please. And to do this, we use different tools in ecology and evolution. So the backbone of our research is really in-depth field experiments. So this is mostly in Alberta, where the Rocky Mountains give us access to huge changes in climate and ecosystems within just a few kilometers. And so we take advantage of these elevational gradients to conduct elaborate, sometimes multi-year experiments where we really drill down and try and understand what's going on for focal species. And this fieldwork is awesome. It's how I cut my teeth in biology. I still love it. But it's also really labor intensive, and you put all this work in and you really, you get the answers for a single species at a time. And so we combine this intensive field work with another strategy, which are global data syntheses. And when we're doing these global syntheses, essentially we're gathering all the data in the world that's been published, and we're bringing together all of this disparate data to try and look for general patterns. So what can we say that's true across ecosystems, across species? A third approach that we use that is relatively new, I've been doing it for the past 5 years or so, are what are called global distributed experiments. And so what I love about this approach is that it really combines the power of targeted experiments with the generality of global data syntheses. And so what happens here is you can come up with a single simple experiment, and through a network of collaborators, you conduct that same experiment across a huge geographic scale. So the map that you can see with the stars shows different sites where we've collected data on the intensity of species interactions in what we call the biotic interaction gradients experiment. And so this is great because you work with people around the world and you can really test patterns at a scale that wouldn't have been possible otherwise. And then finally, the new kid on the block for us are micro landscapes. So there are some questions that no matter how you do it are hard to test in nature. And especially this happens when you're looking over long time scales. So say you're interested in evolution, or huge spatial scales. So when you're trying to understand global patterns or landscape-wide processes. And so what we're trying to do is come up with a lab system where we can essentially create landscapes in miniature and then allow microorganisms to live and evolve across them. And so that lets us vary any component of the landscape that we think is interesting to test its effect on species distributions and evolution. And so putting these four approaches together, we're able to test a huge array of theory about species distributions, where species occur, why they occur where they do, how they're evolving, how they're interacting with each other. And we're using this to really try and help understand both the current and future patterns of biodiversity on our planet.
And next we have Professor Liu from the Department of Earth and Planetary Sciences.
Hi, so I'm a seismologist and studying earthquakes and the environment where they take place, the faults. Next, please. So, next slide. So this is a global distribution of earthquakes that have happened in the previous 5 years. The previous slide, please. Right, okay, so I think it's pretty clear from this picture that most of the earthquakes take place along the major tectonic boundaries, but occasionally we also have earthquakes that's in the stable interior of a plate. For example, just last week we had a magnitude 6.5 from Nevada. You can see probably from one of the biggest gray circles on the map in North America. So what my group does is to try to combine the field observations from seismic waveforms and geodetic time series with numerical modeling, and then try to understand how earthquakes nucleate, how ruptures propagate, and how do they stop on tectonic fault or on the series of fracture networks. Next, please. So one of the places that I worked for a lot of time is the Cascadia subduction zone off the west coast, where the Juan de Fuca plate is subducting toward North America. Next slide, please. So if you imagine that if this MAC thrust fault between the two tectonic plates is frictionless, then, sorry, previous one. Then we would expect that when the Fuca plate would just freely sliding down and does nothing to the North American plate. 2 slides back, please. But we know that's not true because when you look at the relative distance between a GPS station at Victoria and with respect to another station in the interior of Alberta, then we see the relative distance gets shorter and shorter with time, roughly every 60 millimeters in 12 years of period. And that's because there's a finite friction happening on the tectonic fault that's holding those 2 blocks together until eventually it's going to release in a large MAC thrust earthquake. So imagine that if we can have this kind of sub-millimeter precise deformation record for the entire margin, including offshore, then we will be able to estimate when the next big earthquake happens, how much of offset we're going to experience. And that's a very key piece of information for us to estimate, for example, ground shaking as well as tsunami hazard. Next slide, please. Another place that I have spent a lot of time on is the oceanic transform faults of Eastern Pacific rise. And the reason is because here the earthquakes, magnitude 6 earthquakes, they happen so frequently, every 5-6 years and very regularly, to the point that we can predict when the next one is going to come and put seismometers at the bottom of the seafloor ahead of time so that we can record in very near field how precisely the rupture process is taking place in real time. And the idea is to make use of this frequently happening, relatively large but harmless earthquakes in the middle of the ocean and borrow the knowledge that we can learn from there and try to teach us how we would experience if there's an equivalent magnitude of earthquake that's going to happen on the San Andreas Fault next to population. Next slide, please. Now, very far away from active plate boundaries, we also have something we call intraplate seismicity, and Montreal is sitting on top of one of them. This is West Quebec seismic zone, where you see this dots pop up as seismicity in every 5 years in the past 35 years of period. So what we do is we collect waveforms from the different seismic stations and try to extract information, for example, what's the orientation of the fault that the earthquake is happening and how much of stress has been released in a single rupture. And by using the information we derived from this relatively smaller magnitude of events and try to extrapolate to, for example, if there's going to be another magnitude 5.8 earthquake in Montreal, and what kind of ground shaking that we're going to experience by combining the source information we derive from seismology and local geology. Next slide, please. So another example of intraplate seismicity is happening in Western Canada, where there is a lot of industrial activity in the search for example, hydrocarbon resources. So we know that this kind of activity like hydraulic fracturing and the disposal of wastewater co-produced from fracking can cause seismicity. Next slide, please. So in the past 3 years, we have set up a very dense local seismic network in the mountain basin of Northeast British Columbia. And one of the first order products out of this experiment is that we can now detect more than 2 orders of magnitude of events in the same area compared to the national catalog. And this allows us to make a very clear spatial temporal correlation to the fluid injection activity that's going on in the same area. And this is key information for identifying the causal relationship between hydraulic fracturing and seismicity. Next slide, please. The final, I think it's the final slide here, is so everything I talked about so far involves having an earthquake and generate the waveforms. But because all the stations are continuously recording data at 100 hertz of frequency. So majority of data we have from the waveforms has no earthquake information in it. This is what we call the ambient noise. So here's an example that I took from the Montreal station right in the middle of the island from the beginning of March until Tuesday this week, which is showing how the background noise is changing with time. And on top of that, I also put some timelines of the situation that we're sitting through as of today. So we can see from this record here, the blue line is a daily average of the noise level between 6 o'clock in the morning and 4 o'clock in the afternoon. You can clearly see there's a weekly pattern that the city is noisier during the weekdays and quieter during the weekends. On top of that, we can also see that during the lockdown period, the city was relatively quieter compared to the periods before and compared to when the construction work was allowed to restart about 10 days ago. At the bottom here, it's just for comparison of the absolute level of the noise of the lockdown period and what we experienced in the holiday season last year. So that's pretty comparable in terms of the amplitude. So the study of ambient noise in seismology really opens up a lot of doors for seismologists to make contributions to other fields in Earth system science. For example, we can use that to monitor the change of the subsurface structure. For example, the melting of ice and snow and the change in groundwater and permafrost structures in northern regions. That's all from me. Thank you.
And next we have Professor Eric McCullough from the Department of Chemistry.
Hi, thank you, Preeti, and thank you all for showing up. I'm very happy to have a chance to present to you. So I've been at McGill for 2 years now, and my group does a lot of research looking at advanced battery materials. And the first question you might ask is, why do we bother continuing to work on improving batteries? We have these lithium-ion batteries that are fantastic. A team just won the Nobel Prize for it. And in our personal electronics, everyone's very happy with them. Lithium-ion batteries are undoubtedly good enough. But the question becomes, what else can we do with these batteries? So Preeti, could you click forward? Thank you. And the next thing is, let's see if we can go into widespread application of electric vehicles. And here the state of the art is, again, lithium-ion batteries. But essentially, if you put as many batteries as you can into the car, it basically becomes the frame of the car. And the range is 300 kilometers. So it would be really nice to double that. So that's one of the targets of all. So there are a lot of battery research groups around the world right now, and that's one of the big targets, is can we double the amount of energy we can fit in the space so that the car can go twice as far. So this is one area where the state of the art isn't good enough. And the other one, if we click forward again, this is my attempt to bring the sun to Sun in Science. So this is my son's, my toddler, his favorite book. It's called Baby Loves Thermodynamics. And it's all about how all living things get their energy from the sun. So we think that's a pretty good idea. So if we click forward, we really like the idea of getting a lot of solar panels going and that becoming a large part of our electrical grid. But if we do that, we're going to get a huge spike in energy in the middle of the day and our usual big spike in usage at 6 p.m. or thereabouts. So we need to store that massive amount of energy for 6 hours. And the size of storage facilities we'll have to build for this will mean that we don't want these batteries or whatever system we use to last 10 years. They have to last 50 years, well, at least. Because if you have to replace them every 10 years, that's a disaster. So we now want to do two major improvements to batteries. We want to pack double the energy in the space, and we want them to last 5 times longer. So if we click forward, those are two extremely challenging metrics to meet. One more time, Preeti, please. Thank you. So there's a lot of approaches that people are using to improve these batteries. The one that my group is working on developing and applying widely is to accelerate how we test different types of materials. So there's 3 key materials in a battery. There's the anode, the cathode, and the electrolyte in between. And so if we think about a lithium-ion battery here, the anode is graphite, and the lithium is these green circles. And this is in the charged state. So when we use the battery, if Preeti, you can click forward, the lithium moves from the anode into the cathode. And so we can design those 2 materials, the cathode and the anode, to dramatically change the amount of energy that's stored. The other thing that's important is that the electrolyte is not perfectly stable, and it reacts with each of the cathode and the anode. And this leads to the battery dying eventually. So if we can change that electrolyte for something that's less reactive, then we could increase the lifetime. So my group works heavily on the cathode and the electrolyte, and we're starting to work on the anode. So Preeti, could you click forward one more time? Yeah. So if we look at the cathode to start with, we can accelerate the discovery of new and better cathodes, essentially by, instead of making one material at a time, my members of my group will make 64 on a single plate. So you see it here with the pretty colors. So they're synthesizing 64 different cathodes. And if you click forward one more time, please. Yeah. And one more just for good measure. Yeah, thank you. So the first one that just appeared is the special cell that we designed and adapted in our lab to be able to test 64 different batteries at once. So we have a printed circuit board that we put our 64 electrodes onto, and we assemble it into a single cell, and we cycle all 64 together. And we see that we can get the battery performance of all 64 at once. And so then we can pull off the battery metrics from these measurements and put them onto a ternary phase diagram, for example. So now we can look on that ternary phase diagram and say, oh, that red spot is where there's the highest energy density. That's a really good spot for us to go look for better battery materials. And then we can think about adding different dopants, different additives into the material. And we can do the same kind of thing with the electrolyte. We can look at the stability of the electrolyte as a solid electrolyte. And if you click forward one more time, I think I put a circle around the anode. Yeah. Excuse me. So we've started to work on all three components now of the battery, and also looking at sodium-ion batteries and other technologies. So a lot of groups around the world are looking at a lot of different technologies to meet these challenging demands. And 2 years in, we have a few papers out of the group. Every one of those papers has had an undergrad on it. I've had 9 undergrads in 2 years, and you guys are an absolutely fantastic part of the research group, and in many ways the lifeblood of the summer research. So I am very happy to get this chance to present some of my work to you guys.